On the evening of July 6, 1944, the sun cast long shadows across the runway at RAF Manston in Kent, England, as Second Lieutenant Richard Elmer completed his pre-flight inspection of B-17G serial number 423145. Despite being only 24 years old, Elmer was already a veteran with 20 combat missions under his belt, making him one of the more experienced bomber pilots in his squadron. This evening's mission would prove to be unlike any other he had flown. The target was a German V-weapon complex at Neucourt, France, part of Hitler's vengeance weapon program that was raining destruction on London. The V-1 flying bombs, nicknamed buzz bombs by the British, were launched from sites across northern France, and destroying these launch facilities had become a top priority for Allied command. Elmer's bomber would be part of a larger formation tasked with eliminating this threat. What made Elmer's B-17 unique was a recent modification that transformed it from a standard heavy bomber into something far more lethal. While the B-17 Flying Fortress was already heavily armed with 1350 caliber machine guns in various positions, it had always been vulnerable to head-on attacks. The Luftwaffe had long ago identified this weakness and trained their pilots to exploit it with devastating frontal assaults. To counter this threat, Elmer's aircraft had been fitted with an experimental chin turret housing twin 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns in an extremely tight grouping, directly controlled by the pilot. Additionally, two single 50 caliber guns were mounted on either side of the nose. This configuration gave the aircraft an unprecedented 8 forward-firing heavy machine guns, equivalent to the firepower of a P-47 Thunderbolt fighter. In total, Elmer's modified B-17 bristled with 1750 caliber weapons, making it perhaps the most heavily armed bomber in the European theater. As the formation crossed the English Channel and approached the French coast near Calais, German anti-aircraft batteries opened fire. The black puffs of flak began appearing around the bombers, each explosion sending deadly shrapnel in all directions. Elmer's position at the front of the formation made him a prime target. Suddenly, a tremendous bang shook the aircraft. Looking out his left window, Elmer saw thick black smoke pouring from the inboard port engine. Shrapnel had torn through the wing, creating multiple holes from which aviation fuel was now streaming. With practiced efficiency, born from his previous missions, Elmer immediately shut down the damaged engine to prevent a catastrophic fire and increased power to the outboard engine to compensate for the asymmetric thrust. The Luftwaffe had been monitoring the incoming raid and scrambled 3 squadrons of Focke-Wulf 190s, 26 fighters in total, to intercept the bombers. The FW-190 was one of Germany's best fighters, fast and heavily armed, with experienced pilots who knew exactly how to attack B-17 formations. They typically approached from the front, where the bomber's defensive armament was traditionally weakest, making high-speed passes that gave the gunners little time to react. Elmer spotted 3 FW-190s approaching from the west, setting up for a classic frontal attack. Instead of maintaining formation as doctrine dictated, he made a bold decision. Breaking away from the other bombers, he turned his damaged B-17 directly toward the attacking fighters. The German pilots must have been surprised, but likely pleased. Here was a wounded bomber, already smoking from one engine, apparently trying to ram them. It seemed like an easy kill. They were completely unprepared for what happened next. At maximum effective range, Elmer opened fire with his experimental chin turret. The concentrated firepower of the tightly grouped twin .50 calibers, combined with the 4 nose-mounted guns, created a devastating cone of fire. The lead FW-190 simply disintegrated under the barrage, exploding in a ball of flame and debris. The second German fighter pilot, witnessing his wingman's destruction, attempted to break away, pulling up sharply, but Elmer's reflexes were faster. Tracking the evading fighter with his powered chin turret, he sent another stream of heavy bullets into the Focke-Wulf. The German aircraft burst into flames, and the pilot barely managed to bail out before his fighter exploded. The third FW-190 escaped by climbing steeply, getting above the angle where the nose guns could engage. But the damage to Elmer's bomber was mounting. The flak had intensified, and another direct hit knocked out the outboard port engine. With only 2 engines running, both on the starboard wing, the B-17 began to yaw dramatically to the left. A second group of 6 FW-190s approached from the north, hoping to finish off the clearly struggling bomber. Fighting against the controls with all his strength, Elmer somehow managed to swing the nose of his B-17 toward the new threat. 4 of the German fighters were flying in a tight attack formation, a tactical error they would pay for dearly. When Elmer opened fire, the concentrated barrage from 8 forward-firing machine guns caught the German formation perfectly. 2 FW-190s were destroyed in a single burst, their close formation working against them as debris from one damaged the other. However, return fire from the surviving fighters tore off Elmer's port side stabilizer and damaged his landing gear hydraulics. Then disaster struck. A direct flak hit destroyed the third engine, leaving Elmer with only one functioning power plant. The asymmetric thrust, combined with the damaged control surfaces, sent the B-17 into a violent spiral. The bomber plummeted out of formation, spinning earthward in what appeared to be its death dive. Drawing on every ounce of his experience and skill, Elmer shut down all engines to prevent overspeeding and fought to regain control. Against all odds, he managed to level out the bomber, though they had lost considerable altitude. His crew prepared to bail out, standard procedure when a B-17 was this severely damaged over enemy territory. But Elmer had other plans. Determined to save his crew from becoming prisoners of war in occupied France, he ordered everyone to remain at their positions. Restarting the sole functioning engine, he began the seemingly impossible task of flying the crippled bomber home on one engine with massive structural damage. Nursing the dying B-17 across the English Channel required every bit of piloting skill Elmer possessed. The single engine strained to keep the heavy bomber airborne, while the damaged control surfaces made every minor course correction a monumental effort. Somehow, through sheer determination and exceptional airmanship, Elmer kept his fortress in the air. Approaching RAF Manston, the same base from which he had departed hours earlier, Elmer faced one final challenge: landing a severely damaged bomber with compromised landing gear and minimal control authority. The crash landing was violent but successful. The B-17 would never fly again, but all 9 crew members walked away uninjured. Second Lieutenant Richard Elmer's extraordinary actions that day earned him the Distinguished Flying Cross. He would survive World War II and return home to Indiana, where he married and raised 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. When the Korean War erupted, Elmer answered his country's call once again, this time flying F-86 Sabres in jet combat. After Korea, Elmer finally retired from military service. His decorations including the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, and the European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal. In retirement, he purchased a golf club, finding peace in the sport he loved. Richard Elmer passed away on May 22, 2011, in his beloved Indiana, leaving behind a legacy of exceptional courage and skill. His experimental B-17, with its unprecedented forward firepower, proved that innovation and aggressive tactics could turn even a wounded bomber into a lethal fighter. In the hands of a skilled pilot like Elmer, it became a weapon that the Luftwaffe had never anticipated, a flying fortress that could fight back with devastating effectiveness.